It was just past 11 p.m. when the lights hit her. Danielle Morgan had been driving south on I-65 for nearly 2 hours, the Alabama highway stretching endlessly ahead of her, flanked by swaying pine trees and shadowy silhouettes of old roadside motels. Rain slicked the pavement, turning every passing headlight into a long silver smear. Inside her car, the soft hum of jazz floated from the speakers. John Coltrane, slow and steady, and Danielle's fingers tapped gently on the steering wheel in rhythm. She wasn't in uniform tonight. No medals, no insignia, no badges of authority. Just a black hoodie, jeans, and her usual confidence. After 16 years in the Navy, 10 of them as a lieutenant commander, Danielle had learned to carry herself with quiet power, the kind that didn't need an announcement. But to the world tonight, she looked like just another black woman on an empty highway. And someone decided that was enough. Red and blue lights exploded in her rearview mirror. They came fast, too fast, filling her car with flashing judgment. Her stomach didn't drop in fear. It clenched with something colder, recognition. Danielle sighed, eased the car onto the shoulder, put it in the park, rolled down the window, hands on the wheel, visible. She'd trained others how to survive these moments, but training and living it, they were never the same. The patrol car idled behind her, its lights washing everything in a harsh strobe. She waited, watched the side mirror. The officer took his time, deliberate, boots crunching wet gravel, one hand resting on his belt. The other was gripping a flashlight that sliced through the car's interior like a search warrant. He didn't greet her. He didn't ask if she was okay. Just a flat command. License and registration. Danielle glanced up. "Yes, officer," she replied, calm and measured, retrieving the documents from her glove box with slow, practiced motions. The flashlight hovered over her face. "Do you know why I pulled you over?" She blinked. "I'm not sure. Was I speeding?" He didn't answer. Just took her license and stepped back, scanning it. "Your left tail light's out," he finally muttered. Danielle frowned. "That's strange. I just had it checked last week. I can have it looked at again." Silence. Then he stepped closer, flashlight now angled more aggressively. "Are you arguing with me?" The shift in his tone was instant. It wasn't a question anymore, it was a warning. Danielle's grip tightened slightly on the wheel. "No, sir, I'm just explaining." He studied her face, a smirk flickered. "Step out of the vehicle." For a broken tail light, her pulse picked up. Not fear, not panic, but awareness of the empty road, the woods nearby, no witnesses, no cameras, just her and a man with the power he hadn't earned. Danielle didn't move. "Can I ask why?" "Because I said so," he snapped. There it was. That line. The one that meant this had nothing to do with taillights. This was about control. Danielle exhaled through her nose, unbuckled her seatbelt, slowly opened the door. The air outside was sharp and damp, laced with pine and tension. She stood, her posture calm but deliberate. Not defiant, just not afraid. He stepped back, eyeing her, recalculating. Then, turn around, hands on the car. Her jaw tensed. "What's the charge, officer?" He didn't answer. Just reached for his radio. "Dispatch, I've got a non-compliant driver." Danielle felt the knot tighten in her chest, not from fear, from frustration. She'd briefed units in Kabul, negotiated with foreign officers on volatile borders, and here she was, being framed as a threat on her own soil. "I need you to understand something," she said, her voice firm but quiet. "I know what my rights are, and I know what yours aren't." His eyes narrowed. "You're under arrest." She blinked. "For what?" "Obstruction of an officer." And just like that, the game was on. He grabbed her wrist too tightly and wrenched it behind her back. Metal clinked. Cold steel cut into her skin. Danielle clenched her jaw, held still, gave him nothing. "You don't know what you're doing," she said under her breath. The officer laughed. "Oh, lady," he said, shoving her toward his cruiser. "I know exactly what I'm doing." But he didn't. Not even close. The inside of the patrol car was colder than Danielle expected. The plastic back seat was hard and unforgiving, molded to restrain movement. Her wrists throbbed, cuffs biting into the skin that had known battlefields and briefings, but never this. She sat still, eyes fixed forward, jaw clenched. The smell of stale coffee and old vinyl filled her lungs. Outside, the rain had picked up, dancing across the windshield in a frantic rhythm. Officer Briggs, she'd caught his name on his badge, whistled softly, his fingers tapping the steering wheel like he was bored. She wasn't saying a word. Not yet. Not to him. You know, he finally said, flicking on the wipers, most people just do what I say. Danielle didn't respond. He laughed, short and bitter. Bet you thought your little attitude would scare me off, huh? That whole strong black woman routine. Still nothing. He glanced at her in the mirror. Military, right? You had that look. But out here? That doesn't mean jack. She blinked, slow and deliberate. You done? His eyes narrowed. The station wasn't far, just off a side road near the edge of town. A squat brick building with flickering lights and a busted flagpole out front. As Briggs pulled into the lot, Danielle's fingers curled slightly against her cuffs. She wasn't scared, but she was calculating. Every second, every move, every angle of this would matter later. He parked in a reserved spot and came around to yank her door open. Let's go, he muttered, not even meeting her eyes. His grip on her arm was firm, not rough. But it was the kind of grip that said, I'm in charge. I can get away with this. He walked her past a sleepy desk sergeant who barely looked up, through the echoing corridor, into booking, fingerprint scanner, mugshot. No questions, no rights read, just process and power. Sit, Briggs barked, shoving her toward a metal bench in a holding cell. She caught herself before stumbling. The cell door slammed behind her, steel on steel. Danielle stood still for a moment. Then slowly she sat. The chill from the bench crept through her jeans. The air smelled like mold and bleach. In the corner, a cracked mirror reflected her face, tired but unbroken. Briggs stood on the other side of the bars, arms crossed, watching her like a man who thought he'd won. Hope you like spending the night here, he smirked. Danielle said nothing. But in her silence, she remembered. A checkpoint in Kandahar, 2013. Danielle, standing her ground as a junior officer, barked in Pashto, his rifle raised. The interpreter was trembling. The convoy waiting. She had spoken calmly, clearly, in the kind of tone that doesn't ask for power, it already owns it. And the rifles had lowered. She hadn't flinched then. She wouldn't flinch now. Back in the present, she met Briggs's stare with a level gaze. This is going to be a mistake you remember for the rest of your life, she said quietly. Briggs chuckled. Lady, I'm not the one behind bars. He walked away, his footsteps fading down the hallway. The hours dragged on. The overhead light flickered, humming like an old fridge. Somewhere beyond the cell, someone laughed. A phone rang. Muffled conversation. A vending machine clanked. Danielle shifted, rolling her shoulders, her wrists burned. She leaned her head back against the wall and stared at the ceiling. One night, that's all she needed to get through, but then something shifted. Another officer walked in, younger, late 20s, nervous energy. He paused outside her cell, clipboard in hand. Miss Morgan? He asked. Danielle looked up. I just need to confirm some information, he said, flipping a page. You're a Navy officer? Lieutenant Commander, she replied calmly. His eyes widened slightly. You're on active duty? Yes, he swallowed. And you weren't read your rights? She raised an eyebrow. Did you see anyone do it? No, ma'am. A pause. Then he looked down and mumbled, I'm gonna make a call. Within 30 minutes, the shift changed. Officers began moving faster. Whispers passed down hallways. Briggs returned, storming in with his jaw set. What the hell did you say to Garcia? Danielle didn't stand, didn't blink. Nothing that wasn't true. You think calling your Navy buddies is going to scare me? I haven't called anyone, she replied, yet. Briggs's fists clenched. She could see it. The fear starting to flicker beneath the arrogance. He turned and stomped away. Danielle finally let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Hours passed. Rain gave way to silence. A clock on the wall ticked. mocking her. The cold settled deeper into her spine. But then, a shuffle outside the cell. She sat up straighter. Briggs again. But this time his face was pale, his eyes darted. Behind him stood another officer. Older, built like a linebacker. The nameplate read, Lieutenant Harris. Briggs didn't say a word. Harris did. "You're being released, ma'am," he said firmly. Danielle raised an eyebrow. "Without charge?" "Yes, ma'am." Harris handed her a clipboard. "There's going to be a full review of this incident. I suggest you speak with legal counsel. Internal Affairs has already been notified." Briggs didn't move, didn't breathe. Danielle stood, her body sore, her soul intact. As Harris uncuffed her, he leaned in quietly. "For what it's worth, I saw the footage. You handled yourself better than most would've." Danielle didn't answer. She didn't need validation from him. But it was something. She walked out of the cell without looking back. Past the sergeant, past the broken vending machine, past Briggs, whose hands now hung limp at his sides, face burning with confusion and disbelief. He had arrested her like she was nothing. Now, for the first time, he wasn't sure what she was. But Danielle Morgan knew exactly who she was. And in the morning, so would the rest of the world. The courtroom was cold, not just from the industrial air conditioning humming through the vents, but from the tension in the room, the kind of chill that settled in the bones. Danielle Morgan stood near the defendant's table, wearing a navy blue blazer, her blouse crisp, her posture relaxed yet unshakable. Her wrists were no longer bound, but the memory of the handcuffs lingered in her joints like a phantom ache. She scanned the room. Reporters filled the back benches, their eyes bouncing between notebooks and phone screens. A local camera crew from Birmingham's Channel 7 News was sitting up in the far corner, lens trained on the front. At the prosecution table sat her attorney, Carla Whitman, a woman with the voice of a preacher and the efficiency of a surgeon. Danielle liked her immediately. And then the door opened. Sergeant Daniel Briggs walked in like he still owned the place. Shoulders squared, chin lifted, trying to summon the same authority he had on that rainy highway. But there was a stiffness in his walk now, a weight in his steps. And when his eyes locked on Danielle, he looked away first. She didn't smile, didn't flinch. She didn't need to. The judge entered, gray hair, glasses, a permanent scowl etched into his face. Judge Malcolm West had a reputation in Jefferson County. No nonsense, fair, and allergic to theatrics. He sat down with a sigh and opened the file. "All right, folks, let's get to it." The prosecutor stood. Middle-aged, polished, his voice was calm but direct. "Your Honor, we are here today to request the immediate dismissal of all charges against Lieutenant Commander Danielle Morgan, and to enter into the record evidence of unlawful detainment, excessive force, and racial profiling conducted by the arresting officer, Sergeant Daniel Briggs." A murmur ran through the room. Judge West's eyes narrowed. "Sergeant Briggs, care to respond?" Briggs stood. "Your Honor, the defendant was uncooperative during a routine traffic stop. She refused commands, delayed the process, and challenged my authority. I followed standard procedure." The prosecutor didn't even blink. "Standard procedure? Let's walk through that." He lifted a printed document. "Lieutenant Commander Morgan has served over 16 years in the U.S. Navy. She holds a security clearance, has completed multiple overseas deployments, and has no criminal history. In fact, she was awarded a commendation medal just last year for her leadership during a multinational exercise in the Mediterranean." He stepped forward. "And yet, despite all this, you believed she was such a threat, over a broken taillight, that you had to forcibly remove her from her vehicle, handcuff her, and detain her without reading her Miranda rights?" Briggs opened his mouth. Closed it. Danielle kept her gaze steady. The prosecutor continued. "Let's talk about your record, Sergeant Briggs." He held up another stack of papers. "In the past 18 months, you've conducted 87 traffic stops involving black drivers. That's 72% of your total stops, in a district where black residents make up less than 40% of the population. A hush fell. Briggs shifted in his chair. "And then there's this," the prosecutor added. "Your body cam footage." He turned toward the judge. "With your permission, Your Honor?" Judge West nodded once. A screen lowered at the front of the room. The footage flickered to life. Rain, headlights. Danielle's voice, calm, clear. Briggs's voice, aggressive, dismissive. The room listened as Briggs cut her off and ordered her out, never once explaining the charge. Then came the arrest. Danielle stepped out, hands visible. His command, "Turn around." Her reply, "What's the reason, officer?" Then the cuffs. The push. The cell. By the time the footage ended, no one made a sound. Judge West leaned forward, hands steepled. "Sergeant Briggs," he said slowly, "not only did you violate department protocol, you made an arrest without probable cause, failed to read the defendant her rights, and escalated what should have been a citation into a full detainment." He set his glasses down. "The charges against Lieutenant Commander Morgan are dismissed." The gavel hit the bench like a gunshot. Danielle didn't breathe. She didn't move. But inside, something was released. The judge wasn't finished. "Furthermore, I am requesting that the district attorney open a formal investigation into Sergeant Briggs's record and conduct. And I strongly suggest the Birmingham Police Department begin its own internal review." Briggs looked like someone had kicked the ground out from under him. His face burned. His hands twitched at his sides. He turned to Danielle, just for a second, but her gaze was unreadable. She didn't gloat. She didn't smirk. She didn't need to. She had already won. Outside the courthouse, the press swarmed. "Lieutenant Commander, do you plan to sue the department? Do you feel vindicated? What do you say to young women of color who see this and are afraid?" Danielle paused on the steps. Carla leaned over. "You don't have to say anything." But Danielle did. Just one thing. She looked directly into the lens of a local camera, her voice calm as ever. "No one is above accountability, not even those with a badge." And then she walked away. Across town, in a narrow office with peeling paint and two chairs that squeaked, Briggs sat across from Captain Eldridge, his supervisor. A folder lay between them. Thick. Heavy. Eldridge didn't speak right away. He didn't have to. Finally, he opened the folder. 87 stops, 72% of black drivers, 5 misconduct reports. Now this. Briggs shifted in his seat. "She disrespected me. She asked questions," Eldridge snapped. "That's not a crime, but what you did may be." Silence. "You're suspended, effective immediately," the captain added. "Internal affairs will be in touch." Briggs stood, fists clenched. "You can't do this." "Yes, I can," Eldridge said coldly, "and I just did." Back home, Danielle sat by her window, a cup of tea in hand. Rain tapped lightly against the glass. Her phone buzzed. A message from Carla. "Briggs is suspended. IA is moving fast. Media's all over it." Danielle smiled, just slightly. But it wasn't victory she felt. It was clarity. Because this had never been about just her. Sergeant Daniel Briggs sat alone in the locker room, the same place where he'd once high-fived other officers after night patrols, the same bench where he'd tied his boots for over a decade. Now it felt like a tomb. His nameplate on the locker door looked foreign, like it belonged to someone else, someone who still mattered. A single envelope sat in his lap. Suspension notice. Unpaid, indefinite, subject to further review. He stared at it like it might catch fire. Across the room, no one spoke to him. Not anymore. Word had spread fast. The footage had gone viral. Bodycam clips spliced with headlines. Black naval officer unlawfully detained. Racial profiling under fire in Birmingham PD. Sergeant Briggs faces suspension. Local news stations ran the footage on a loop. Online forums tore into him. Even national outlets picked it up, embedding the courtroom moment where the judge ordered an investigation with a soundbite from Danielle's attorney. "This isn't just about one stop. This is about a pattern." Briggs turned off his phone, but it didn't stop. His neighbors looked at him differently now. At the gas station, the cashier who always greeted him simply rang up his coffee in silence. A mother pulled her child a little closer when he walked by. An old friend from church crossed the street to avoid him altogether. And at home, it was worse. "Is it true?" his teenage son had asked, voice small. "Did you really do that?" Briggs had no answer. Just silence. His wife, usually composed, stood in the kitchen the night after the hearing and said, "I don't even know who you are anymore." Then she walked upstairs and shut the door. By the end of the week, Internal Affairs had frozen his access to all active systems. He was asked not to return to the station unless requested. Even his badge, his damn badge, was taken from him. He wasn't a cop anymore. Not officially, not in the eyes of the people, not in the eyes of his own department. What stung the most wasn't the punishment. It was the humiliation, the slow realization that the authority he had clung to, used like a weapon, had vanished the second he was forced to answer for it. And maybe, just maybe, deep down, he knew. This wasn't the first time he'd pulled someone over and thrown his weight around. Wasn't the first time he'd let power speak louder than protocol. He had convinced himself it was always justified. That if someone challenged him, they deserved what came next. But now that someone had fought back, and worse, won. Briggs sat at his dining table late into the night, his suspension letter beside a cold cup of coffee. A notepad lay in front of him, blank. He had started to write an appeal, a defense, a statement, something to save face. But what could he say? The footage didn't lie. And Danielle Morgan? She didn't break. She didn't scream, she didn't plead. She had stood taller in silence than he ever had in a uniform. The next morning he received a call from the union rep. "They're distancing." The voice on the line said flatly, "Not just the department. Everyone." Briggs rubbed his eyes. "What does that mean?" "It means you're on your own." Click. End of call. By Thursday, it wasn't just suspension. The mayor had issued a public statement promising zero tolerance for abuse of power. Civil rights groups were marching outside City Hall. An online petition with 250,000 signatures called for Briggs to be fired, charged, and barred from public service permanently. It wasn't a scandal anymore. It was a reckoning. And somewhere downtown, Danielle Morgan walked through the halls of a government building, escorted by 2 federal staffers. The Department of Defense had taken an interest, so had the Pentagon. She wasn't just a victim anymore. She was a witness. A voice. She gave a closed-door briefing to senior officials, relaying what happened that night, not just to punish Briggs, but to shine a spotlight on the broader issue. How often voices like hers went unheard. And this time, they listened. Because she hadn't just told her story. She had shown it. Back in his now quiet home, Briggs watched the interview play on TV. Danielle's face was calm, her voice steady. "She didn't raise her voice once," the anchor said, "but her words are already echoing through every police department in the state." Briggs turned the TV off. He didn't want to hear anymore. Because this time, no matter how loud he shouted, no one was listening. The sun had just started to rise over Birmingham. Soft light spilled across the city skyline, touching rooftops and trees still wet from the previous night's storm. Danielle Morgan stood by the large glass window of her apartment, coffee in hand, wrapped in the kind of quiet that only came after a storm had passed. She hadn't slept much, but she felt still, not at peace. Not yet, but steady. Behind her, the TV played low. News anchors recapped the story she had just lived through, framed it as a victory, a warning, a shift in tides. Lieutenant Commander Danielle Morgan, a decorated Navy officer, became the face of accountability this week after an unlawful arrest exposed systemic profiling within the Birmingham Police Department. She turned the volume down. This wasn't how she wanted to be known. She never asked to become a headline. She didn't want her dignity turned into a trending topic, or her restraint to be praised like it was some miracle that she didn't lose control. She just wanted to go home that night, but something bigger had needed to happen. Later that afternoon, she met with students from a local college, young black women in ROTC uniforms, their postures sharp, eyes locked on her with a mix of admiration and something deeper. Validation. One girl, maybe 19, maybe 20, stood up and asked, "Ma'am, were you scared?" Danielle smiled. Not a performance, just a quiet truth. "Yes," she said, "but I wasn't afraid of him. I was afraid that if I stayed silent, I'd be part of the problem." The room hushed, and then it erupted in applause. Across town, Briggs's name disappeared from the department's roster. His case remained under investigation, but the decision had been made. He would not return. His locker was cleared, his badge was permanently revoked. No official statement was released, just a quiet exit, the kind given to men who are no longer useful but too dangerous to defend. Danielle didn't celebrate, because the point was never revenge. It was responsibility. She gave one final interview, this time with a national outlet. The host asked, "What do you hope people remember from this, Lieutenant Commander?" Danielle paused, her fingers laced together in her lap. Her eyes didn't blink. "I want them to remember that dignity is not a privilege. It's a right," she said. "And when that right is taken, even quietly, even politely, it's still violence. Just because someone doesn't hit you doesn't mean they didn't try to break you." She leaned forward slightly. And sometimes, the most radical thing a person can do is remain calm and still refuse to be silenced. The clip went viral. Millions watched, not because it was loud, but because it was true. Weeks passed. The noise died down, the hashtag stopped trending, the media moved on. But Danielle didn't. She began working with local advocacy groups, helping train officers on de-escalation tactics and cultural competency. She spoke at academies, at community forums, not because she was forced to, but because she had survived. And when you survive something like that, you don't walk away unchanged. You become the change. One evening, while walking through a quiet park, Danielle noticed a mother sitting on a bench. A little black boy, maybe 6 years old, ran through the grass with a toy plane in hand. Laughing. Free. The mother looked up. Their eyes met. She didn't say anything. She just nodded, and Danielle nodded back. That was enough. Because this wasn't just about her. It never was. It was about the countless people who never got their footage released, who never made it to court, who never had the rank, the record, or the voice to defend themselves. Danielle had all three. And she used them, for every name we never learned, for every story that ended before it had a chance to begin. This story isn't just about justice. It's about what happens when power goes unchecked, when silence becomes complicity, and when one person chooses to push back anyway. Danielle Morgan didn't shout. She didn't threaten. She didn't run. She stood firm. And in doing so, she reminded us, power without accountability is not power, it's danger. So if this story made you think, if it made you angry, if it made you hope, then don't scroll past. Talk about it, share it, act on it. Because change doesn't start in courtrooms. It starts in conversations like this.